Hello everyone, today we are going to present you the book The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brain, written by Nicholas Kerr in 2020. So it's the reedition of an initial book published in 2011. So during this presentation, we are going first to present you Nicholas Kerr, then the main ideas of our book. After we will continue with a quick presentation of three of its work, an article and two books, and then we will conclude. So let's begin with Nicholas Kerr. So it's an American writer known for its writing about technology, business, culture. He studied at Dartmouth College and Harvard University, and through his career, he has held several responsibilities and positions, like member of the Encyclopedia Britannica's editorial board of advisors, or even executive editor at the Harvard Business Review. So in total, he has written 5 books and numerous articles for many newspapers, like for example, the New York Times or the Atlantic. In 2003, he wrote the Harvard Business Review, It Doesn't Matter, followed by his first book, Does It Matter?, in which he argues that information technology no longer provides competitive advantage for companies. In 2008, he published The Big Switch, examining the new world that develops due to the rise of internet. He also wrote Is Google Making Us Stupid?, in which he critiques the effect of internet on people's mind. An argument develops more deeply in its book The Shallows that we are going to present you. Also in 2014 and 2016, he wrote The Glass Cage and Utopia is Creepy. So in the former, Kerr explores the consequences of the automation on people's life and on people's mind. And the second one entails a collection of blog posts, essay reviews, and raises questions about the future of technology. And since 2005, he writes the blog Road Types, an independent blog about technology, culture, economics.
In this first chapter, the author testified to his uncomfortable feeling about his way of thinking. Before, it was easier for him to immerse himself in the book and follow the story. This is only rare today. One of the possible reasons for the change would be the internet. Indeed, with this tool, our brain has become accustomed to having access to information very quickly and to going directly to the essentials. This bad habit implies minimal and ephemeral concentration. The children of this generation fall into the ease of following a story via a movie or a series, for instance. Indeed, they do not develop their imagination since everything is illustrated. We are then moving from a non-linear thought process to a process based on synthesis and speed. The internet had to change all our old habits that became obsolete. The internet users became content generators, and then this community spirit has made the internet even more powerful. The more options and functionalities the internet offers, the more time we spend on it. Nowadays, our brain needs to be constantly connected for fear of missing an email, an announcement, a text, or an event. The second chapter of this book is very technical and contains complex words such as neuroplasticity, cortex, theories of empiricists and rationalists, etc. If you want to know more about it, please feel free to refer to our report. However, the main idea of this chapter is the fact that the brain can adopt good habits to combat an handicap or a demanding situation. However, it can also adopt unhealthy habits that will take more time to be forgotten or replaced by better ones. This is very visible, for instance, when we talk about disease and addiction. And the internet is a major contributor to this.
In order to be able to understand the following chapters, the author uses metaphors for our brain and helps us understand human evolution in a unique way. Nicholas Carr, the author, quotes Aristotle as he says that the function of the brain, in a sense, was to keep the body from overheating. Aristotle said that the blood rises from the fiery region of the chest until it reaches the head, where the brain sets it back to moderation, and then it flows back to the rest of the body in a temperature-controlled manner, portraying that the brain plays a similar role to that of vaporizing showers in Mother Nature, where water is evaporated from the surface of the earth and rained back in the form of showers. This process helps nourish the earth and helps life sustain in a gentle and harmonious manner. Similarly, the brain helps gush the blood back to important parts of the body, sustaining life in the human body. In Chapter 3, Tools of Mind, we learn that human evolution has come in different stages that have advanced with time. We begin with primitive descriptions of the environment around us and gradually move towards more descriptive and vivid definitions of our surroundings. The author uses several examples, such as a fighter jet that helped us reach new bounds, increasing our physical strength, microscope extending the range in our sensitivity, the birth control pill allowing us to modify nature itself. Let me elaborate more on our fourth example of maps and clocks. In drawing maps, we can barely replicate with accuracy the perspective or distances, but as we grow more familiar with the information, a certain visual realism appears in our illustrations. Let me elaborate more on our fourth example of maps and clocks. In drawing maps, we can barely replicate with the accuracy, perspective, or distances, but as we grow more familiar with the information, a certain visual realism appears in our illustrations, and scientific calculations help us set a more accurate tone. Historical advances in humans mapping out distances didn't simply mirror the development and growth of the human mind, but also helped humanity gain a more real sense of the actual world. What maps did for space, clocks did for time. Time was measured by instruments that emphasized the natural process, sundials around which shadows would move, hourglasses around which sand would pour, and so on. The author then continues to help us understand the evolution of our minds through the history of how books came to be. So, in Chapter 4, The Deepening Page, we learn how in Egypt, scrolls were manufactured from papyrus plants to create writing surfaces that are not so different from the paper we use up until today. As writing became more common, demand for a cheap surface to write on grew, leading to the development of the wax tablet, a simple wooden frame that was filled with layers of wax, and a stylus was used to prescribe words on it, which could then easily be scratched off, making it convenient for use again and again. The wax tablets were far more economical than scrolls. As writing developed, sewn parchment sheets between rigid rectangles of leather were invented. The first real books quickly became the format for publishing Bibles and other controversial writings. In the next slide, Nicholas Carr takes us way back to early forms of writing. As you can see in the picture on the left, no spaces separate the words, as this reflected the way we speak our language without inflicting pauses after each word, as writing was heavily based off of speech. The order that the words were written in also played no major role. This made reading the written text very hard, as it was difficult to tell where one word ended and the other began. The placing of spaces between words relieved individuals of cognitive strain and made reading much more efficient, with greater comprehension. As societies indulged more and more in reading, libraries, universities, and reading rooms were developed. Publishing industries started to take shape in order to fulfill the increasing demand for books. A lively market for books materialized, and for the first time in history, books had prices.
The part I covered in the book continues to take a look at the history of technology and how the computer and internet came about. In this chapter, the author explores how Alan Turing's imagined computing device would become the blueprint for today's computer. He goes on about how someone's simple idea became a reality and how it's transformed every aspect of our lives. The internet has altered the way we think, communicate, we shop, and so much more. The author argues that we've lost a sense of ability to remain focused due to all the distractions the internet has caused. Although we notice some negative aspects that the internet has brought to our lives, we can clearly see the positive advancement it has created for us. The internet does not only connect businesses with consumers, but it also connects people with one another. All these media services would be imaginable if we were not introduced to the internet. So much so that the web has become the world's meeting hub with all these social media platforms. Now all media companies are circulating a digital version of their product across the internet. To add to this, since the speed of internet has increased significantly, so has the amount of time we spend online. We are now constantly connected and logged in on every minute of the day. In 2009, a study showed that young American adults were spending on average 19 hours per week in front of a screen, and it has probably doubled by now. The author brings in the argument that Americans are spending a significant amount of time consuming screen. Some changes that have come up due to the acceleration of the internet are print publications, who have seen a drastic decrease in the use of print. Since people's habits are slowly changing, we are reading less words on pages and more on the web. Another change is the digitalization of media, such as all old texts, such as newspapers, magazines, journals, and books, are being uploaded to the web to keep up with these trends. So in this chapter, the author is attempting to enlighten the readers on the positive and negative aspects of the evolution of technology. The changes in technology and the internet have altered the way we read, communicate, and conduct business. The internet has fogged our brains since we are constantly distracted by our screens and unable to stay focused. So who are to blame, our brains or the internet? With the influence of the internet, the author questions the future of books. He argues that books are the most resistant to the internet's influence. Publishing companies have suffered a significant loss to their business since plenty of people are making the shift from printed pages to digital. Nevertheless, the digital media revolution has shown no signs of slowing down. One of the most popular digital readers is the Amazon Kindle. Most books are slowly making their transition into ebooks, where readers are now able to download and have access to thousands of books at their fingertips. The author calls attention to different experience one gets when reading from an actual book to an ebook. For one of the authors, Stephen Johnson, realized that the ebooks would change the way we read, write, and sell books in insightful ways, but was still thrilled by the potential of the Kindle and how books have become as searchable as web pages. Whereas another author had a different experience with a book and found that his eyes became restless from the screen and found it extremely difficult to concentrate with all these little distractions. The author makes it clear that books are not obsolete, but that these new technologies have forced us to spend less time reading actual books. The internet represents the continuation of technological and social development that have arisen from people's support of electronic media and how it's affected our lives ever since.
One of the points that Carl mentioned is that internet is engaging many of our senses, like our vision, body, audition. It provides us social, intellectual, and physical nourishment. We are looking for information. We are expressing ourselves. We are conversing with others. But this rise of interactivity and connectivity due to social media, phone, and messages is increasing the level of stimuli we receive. So we are always distracted and overwhelmed by information, and it can prevent us to think deeply and creatively. Carol also mentions that Google is encouraging this disruption of our attention, and it's due to the fact that it tailors results to create clicks, traffics, and also Google participates to superficial reading and the reduction of our capacity to read and think deeply, because it worked on the digitalization of books. So globally, Carl said that Google is affecting our mind, but our minds are also inspiring Google to do it. One of the points that also Carl mentioned is that internet is causing fundamental changes, so negative and positive ones. First, the negative ones are that the way we read is less deep and engaged compared to when we are reading a book. Also, we can't retain information and understand it correctly because the amount of information is surpassing our capacities. Also, the development of hyperlinks and multimedia, called the hypermedia, impose a higher cognitive load and creates a division of our attention, and so it limits information acquisition. Also, digital documents impact reading behavior. So we now read in a non-organized way. We pay more attention to hypermedia. We focus on headline titles, and people want to go fast and gather as much information as possible. Also, notification of messages are causing frequent interruptions in our life and is distracting us, causing multitasking and switching costs. But above all, Carl has also presented positive consequences of internet. The fact that it develops a neural pathway and brain activity in all regions of our brain. It also prevents us from social isolation, making us constantly connected and informed with valuable information. Also, it makes us develop cognitive skills like coordination, reflex, faster processing of information, identification of details, for example. So it strengthens brain functions and allow us to be more able to solve problems quickly and use our knowledge. So it makes us more efficient in our life and work.
Carr begins chapter 9 by speaking about the concept of artificial memory, which is basically the idea that external resources such as Wikipedia can function as a sort of memory in the sense that you can access them, although they're not ingrained within your brain. He thinks that this is good because it allows one's memory to have a greater amount of facts and ideas, as well as autonomy, which is good because your memory is a big part of who you are, but there's a downside if a lot of people pick the same sources to form their memory. After this, he speaks about human memory in relation to artificial memory. So a lot of people view artificial memory as a sort of analogy to better understand the way the internet interacts with our brains. However, others look at it as a legitimate extension of our brain, which he thinks is wrong. So in arguing this, he tries to show that there's a categorical difference, and he does this by showing what the right conception of human memory is. So there's synapses, which are connections between neurons. There's short-term and long-term memory. But one thing he really emphasizes is how there's different biological processes for short-term and long-term memory. So for long-term memory, there's a synthesis of new proteins. There's synaptic consolidation, which is when synapses change and grow. As well, there's a fine-tuning on a molecular level with chemicals such as serotonin. He speaks more about human memory and talking about implicit memory, which is done without conscious awareness, such as riding a bike, and explicit memory, which is with conscious awareness, which is something such as remembering names. For explicit awareness, there's synaptic consolidation, which I spoke about, and there's system consolidation, which is basically discovered during the psychological experiments of HM, which discovered that the hippocampus interacts with the cortexes in order to form memories. Another important topic is the role that attentiveness plays in memory consolidation. So attention produces dopamine, which sends signals to enact the hippocampus, which, like I said, is necessary for long-term memory. However, with the internet, there's a lot of overactivity and competing messages, which makes it harder for long-term memories to form. It also makes it harder for high-order intellectual tasks, as well as emotional engagement. In the next chapter, he begins by talking about the Turing test, which is basically the philosophical idea that if a machine can fool a human into thinking that it can think, then that you could call the machine a thinking thing. So there's a program called ELISA, which successfully did this, and it even went as far as seducing the secretary of its creator. But its creator, Weizenbaum, denied the thesis of the Turing test and saying that what makes us human is what is least computable about us, which is essentially our emotions and experiences, which then relate to thinking. Another topic Carr talks about is the blurring between the internal and the external. So an example of this can be thinking about a hammer. So our brain neurologically processes the hammer as an extension of ourself. And there's an issue with this, as he quotes McLuhan saying, tools numb the parts of the amplify, and the idea is that basically if you become too reliant upon the external, that the internal itself will weaken and be damaged. So this can be seen in how the computer extends to our nervous system, which basically is most significant in social ways. So there's overactivity in social parts of the brain. This not only confuses us and removes us from what is a natural state of social being, but it can also lead to anxiety and other negative effects. Another important topic that he discusses is how companies seek to have a competitive advantage on the internet by making their processes of going through their websites very seamless. Although this is profitable, it lessens the problem-solving abilities that people need in order to do this. So when he looks at all of these negative aspects, he doesn't think that this is enough to make the technology go backwards. Rather, he thinks that human software will update, and this essentially means that the human brain will adapt to the circumstances that it finds itself in. Another important point is mentioned in the afterword, where he says that the internet is not just youth culture, it's also mainstream culture. In understanding the book, is Google making us stupid? A fundamental idea to understand is that Google and the internet is a major information source today. So say in the past, there might have been books or something like that. Today it's the internet, which means that we have to pay attention to what the medium entails. One of the things that the medium entails is what he calls skimming activity, which is basically when you skim through a text, you don't go into too much detail and you try to pick out key things. So this on the one hand is good for quickly finding information, and it can be good for critically thinking. However, this means that when people are reading, it's much less deep than before, and this has us operating in ways that are similar to computers.
In this book, the author talks about electricity, which is revolutionary because of its mobility and simple transmission thanks to the development of electric cables. The authors talk about the centralization of the internet and the fact that it will become a public service that individuals and companies will use in their daily lives. The big revolution is the fact that you can use the same software on several computers with the illusion and the feeling of being the only one to use it. This has changed the necessary skills required to work in companies that are looking for qualified employees who know how to use internet and its secrets. In the second part of his book, Nicholas Carr criticizes and denounces the dark sides of the internet. The cloud gradually leads to the disappearance of traditional IT departments and the entire workforce. Then personalization is also criticized. It pushes individuals to select the information that favors their own opinion and thus ignores the rest, which encourage and favorize polarization and extremism. The cloud is also criticized for its security in this book. Finally, the author discusses artificial intelligence. He's afraid that it will influence our choices and our behaviors. He's afraid that the machine will take over from now on the man.
The book Glass Cage speaks of how technology has crept into our daily life so effortlessly and taken over simple tasks, profoundly altering the basic activities in significant ways. It has grown at a steady speed and has evolved into becoming an essential part of our daily lives, simply to say that humans are losing touch with their basic necessities of labor. Automation handles too many tasks in our lives, and we, as humans, are left disarmed to perform these activities ourselves because we lose memory of how everything is done. This evolution has no doubt made our lives easier, but this efficiency comes at a cost of overdependence, reliability, and eventually losing the very essence of performing mundane human tasks, drifting us away from our very core that makes us humans. Technology holds a benchmark that is so difficult to reach for ordinary humans that overdependence has become the new normal. Nicholas Carr tells us how in 2009, Airbus accident and Air France plane had crashed into the ocean, killing 228 people because the pilots lost control of the plane as the autopilot function had failed, denying them access to the system altogether. He argues that this was a mere instance of when technology had built a wall between human control and tech, overpowering a situation that could have been avoided had there been manual guidance. And similarly, there may be further instances where technology will make a decision that overpowers what common human wants. Automation is neither good nor bad. Like most things in life, you allow it the control it holds. Humans tend to bound themselves to these glass cages by not knowing how to balance their physical environment with their technological one, ending up giving their screens too much control of their lives.
At the beginning of the novel, Carr talks about how in the early days of the internet, many people saw this as creating a sort of future utopia. Of course, this hasn't been the case, as there are many positive and negative aspects, but from a marketing perspective, it's very important to understand the way that this has impacted people and consumerism. For example, with the democratization of information, consumers are much more informed and empowered than ever, which means that it's important for companies to have a very consumer-centric approach. As well, given the lessened attention span and the harder it is for people to form long-term memories, it's important that companies' messaging is very simple and memorable. As well, there are a lot of online communities, so word-of-mouth marketing is now more important than ever. As well, it's important to be profitable, but at the same time, there's a lot of ethical concerns that come with a lot of the negatives of the internet.